methodology the same as what we were using at the flood center? And the answer to that was no. So we went and applied the same methodologies that we were using in the flood center that were going to be used for the rest of the state. And the hydrology then was slightly different. So the discharges that FEMA was using in their star contractor for the west ditch were quite a lot higher than the ones that FEMA had already accepted for us to use for the rest of the state. So we applied that to the model and ended up with an inundation that was quite a lot smaller. And the difference in the inundation is the light blue area is the area that we would show being mapped by West Creek, overlaid on top of the original STAR provided map. So it affects the downtown area and it affects the properties right along the west ditch. So it's fairly considerable. But in doing that map, it was clear to us that the type of modeling, a one-dimensional modeling, the way that it's developed is that you assume a cross-section across the flowway as well as the floodplain, and that cross-section should basically be perpendicular to the pathway of water flow. So that cross-section comes across here and then goes and angles across the community. But there's a lot of latitude in terms of where that cross-section lies, and once we've calculated the depth along the stream, then we extend it out along that cross-section to where it intersects the topography. And that's a little bit of a complex technical issue, but we were concerned that there may not really be enough water coming down the creek to fill this entire area. You know, imagine if that floodplain went out miles and miles and miles, there may not be enough water coming down the creek to fill that area. So the next level of complexity of modeling is one that we call a two-dimensional depth average model, where we'll start to account for the volume that lies out in the floodplain area more accurately. And that's what I came here tonight to describe to you. So this is the community, an aerial image of the community. City Hall is located there with the star. That's what the digital elevation information that came from the statewide LiDAR survey looks like. And if you look at the lowest point of the elevations across, you know, the town or the developed area, it lies about along that red path just to the north and east of City Hall. So that's about the low point of the topography. Once water would come out of the west ditch, that would be the path that we would expect it to take.
Where's City Hall in there?
The star.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the star. So we start with the overall area. This is beyond the watershed. The stream center line is indicated by the blue line. We've got basic topographic information for the area, the land use for the area, where all the buildings are located, the type of land cover. We have the digital elevation information that came from the LiDAR data. One of the sort of the little nuances to the LiDAR data is that every place that there's a roadway over the creek, the first point of return at that location is off of the roadway or the bridge. So we have to go through and do a process called hydrologic enforcement, and that basically cuts those areas out and makes it look like the river that flows or the stream that flows underneath the bridge. So all of it's been hydrologically enforced. And then when we do the simulations that show the model runs, we have water coming down the creek. Once it overflows now, it starts to travel through the streets and through the community and around the buildings. And this shows the basic depth grid, and the small little black dots are the directions or the vectors of the stream flow or the overland flow that's going through the community. So you see that looks quite a lot different. This is the original west ditch boundary. This is the one-dimensional model results. And now this is what we get from the two-dimensional model results. So quite a lot less because now we're accounting for that full volume of water that's being produced in the upper part of the watershed, flowing out over the banks and then through the community. So this is a more advanced engineering approach. This isn't the standard approach, but it's more appropriate for the the complex environment that you have in a small city like this. Again, just go back. This is the reduced floodplain area that we calculated based on the 1D modeling approach, and now the revised two-dimensional modeling approach. This has not been shared with FEMA yet. We haven't started the process of submitting this to FEMA. There is, as Ryan and I have chatted, and we've chatted with city leadership, rather than taking this all the way to the final end, which would have been actually to apply a rainfall event to the upper part, we've simply taken the discharges in the stream and applied those. That's somewhat of a simplification that we'll have to talk to FEMA about whether they'll accept that. The next level of complexity will be to add a rainfall event to this 2D model. We're happy to do that, but didn't want to go to that level of effort until we knew that there was a potential for benefit. And we think there is a potential for benefit based on this inundated area, so we would proceed with that next level of modeling. I think that was it. So there's a lot of engineering behind it. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that, or either through Ryan or Steve or others, we can try to answer questions about the FEMA process.
You said add a potential rain event.
Yeah, so
How do you pick a 10-inch rain, or
yeah,
if you had to do that?
there's a design storm that we'll use, and it would be the 100-year design storm event that we would apply to that. That may provide slightly different discharges than the 100-year stream flow as calculated by the USGS regression equations. So it's a prescribed type of rainfall over a certain period of time over that entire watershed. It may be a little higher, it may be a little lower. Those flood extents could grow or shrink a little bit, but the noticeable difference, the significant difference between what we've calculated with the 2D model versus the 1D model says that we should do that. But rather than having that expense up front, because again we're doing this within the overall program in the flood center, we don't want to put good resources after something if we would be splitting lines on the map. So.